Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good.
All
I'm gonna
right.
say,
Well,
yeah.
thank you everyone for clicking on our faces or our cartoon faces. Today we are going to be diving into the mythos and lore of Freyja. Now, uh, Jeff, when did you first learn about this Norse goddess?
Wow. Probably as a young kid, probably in the mid to late 70s, when I stumbled upon comic books,
Okay.
and stumbled upon Thor comic books, and started learning about Norse mythology. Can't say that that is absolutely the first time, but it might be because when I was a kid, my parents got me like the World of Disney, but it was an encyclopedia, but it was a Disney encyclopedia. So there were
Mhm.
definitely books on mythology and like Robin Hood and King Arthur, as well as like geology and things like that. And I was attracted to certain things, including mythology and anything with swords and monsters. Just like every other kid, dinosaurs. Um,
Mhm.
so I can't tell you exactly when, but I always knew Frigga as being Odin's wife. Um, so yeah, so that's probably when I didn't realize that there was this whole separate world of the Asgardians or the Aesir and the Vanir until much,
Mhm.
much later. I didn't learn the details of it into somewhere into my journey with Garden of Doom. In fact, we had a show on Norse mythology where the guest expert, he was like, "Yeah, they're two different sides. They had a fight, and all you really need to know about it is that they sort of came to a truce." Um,
Okay.
and that's sort of true in the story. And I don't want to get too much into it, but I think we have to. But there's a lot of mysteries with Freya. Like, is Freya and Frigg or Frigga the same goddess? Was she then? Is she now? Um,
Okay.
what did she represent? What did she fit? What does this say about the whole relationship of the Vanir? And because comparative mythology has become my thing accidentally, by the way, anyone who listens to, by the way, this is Garden of the Superior. We should say hi. This is the premiere show. It's your show.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just, here to learn and host and discuss all of the mysterious and mythological.
Yeah,
Um,
but like Freya, you are the queen and the lead goddess, the sacred
oh,
feminine here. So you should take the
thank
lead.
you, thank you so much. It's a hard title to bear, but hopefully I wear it well. As far as
We'll
knowing
both
anything
drink our
or
mead to
first,
that.
oh, cheers.
Yeah, it's not coffee. It's definitely mead.
Now, I recently became aware of Norse mythology as a whole when Vikings came out. This show Vikings on the History Channel like some years ago. That's when I kind of was kind of introduced to it. I find it very interesting. I've heard about the, I think it's called the Prose Edda and things like that, because with these I guess pagan religions, they predate a lot of our, a lot of the Christian religions. And I do know a little bit about how this belief was almost purged of um, out of existence. So I'm interested to learn a little bit about what's left over, like what wasn't destroyed, and what we know now about this goddess here.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a few overarching themes. One, when you slipped and said north, it's not really wrong. If you said north and included the word European, you would have been correct, because when we think of Norse now, we think of Scandinavian, but North or Norse mythology has its origins, just like most of the mythologies, from somewhere in the Indo-European, what I call the Fertile Delta. which includes the Fertile Crescent, sort of the Nile Delta through the Tigris and Euphrates, but extends to the Indus Valley and then crosses in the Great Triangle, sort of through the Caspian and Black Seas on other sides, sort of the Pontic steppes, so to speak, basically Ukraine and into sort of central, or well, I guess it would be Eastern Russia, but sort of central Europe, sort of where you would think that the Slavs came from. So, and if you trace origin myths, creation stories, as far as Japan, Shintoism, and the Chinese Taoists, which by the way, they're very similar, some of the basics are the same as the sort of the original Indo-European and Norse. So as strange as things seem, they're all rather strangely related. I'm not going to go into all of that, but for the purposes of Norse, let's talk about northwest Russia, going into whatever counts as central Russia for now. So let's say Moscow, and then take a line to the left or to the west, and let's cut through the Ural Mountains and into what's now Germany. Basically the most of Europe is named after a bunch of German tribes anyway, which the Angles, German, the Saxons, German, the Franks, German. I mean, yeah, the Deutsch is German. So yeah, so it's and by the way, Odin, German, not the original king of those gods. Tyr was, who became Thor, sort of your typical hero, fertility, rain. And by fertility, you mean more rain, like food fertility kind of thing, because they're one and the same. You need the storm lightning god. Anyway, all the way across the British Channel and the North Sea and the Baltic, up into Scandinavia, into England and Scotland, and even made its way to Ireland and Iceland and Greenland, and some might say even the New World. But with that, you get story drift and language drift. So all of those things apply. And also, you said what wasn't destroyed, and the Eddas and things like that. So, like a lot of old traditions, most people didn't write. In some places, you weren't allowed to write unless you were either nobility or in the priestly caste, or one or the other. And this is no exception. This is mostly oral tradition. So this is almost the same as like when you're talking about the First Nations and Native Americans. There's not a whole lot written down. So while the Hopi and the Denai may have similar stories, they're not exactly the same, even though they're neighboring nations. And while the Algonquin have certain stories, the Algonquin people stretch all the way from Alaska into, well, where I live in the mid-Atlantic and probably even further south. So there's about, and I know First Nations folks called, first of all, in Canada, I think First Nations is the preferred term. In the United States, Native American is the preferred term, and the term tribe period is disfavored. But I'm just going to say tribes because I don't know how else to say it to a broad-based audience that isn't current with the proper terminology, and I'm not sure I even am. But in the Algonquin people, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of tribes. Anyway, getting back to Norse. So generally, it's believed that these Germanic, and I'm going to say Germanic mythologies, which is it's religion. It's a pagan religion. It's not the only pagan religion, but I think some people, when you talk about paganism, especially here in the United States or North America, generally you sort of think Vikings, and maybe that's probably sort of accurate. But it's sort of agreed that by around 400 BCE, 400 BC, about 2,400 years ago, that's when you sort of had a Germanic culture that was sort of, at least culturally tied together. The first writings didn't occur until 600 Common Era, so 1,400 years ago.
Okay.
And that was from Iceland. So obviously there was a lot of drift there. The next most famous writing is one is the Norse Edda, and the other is the Poetic Edda. And then the other, I think, is from the 13th century, which was the 1200s. So again, 600 years later or 700 years later. Both of these versions were where these worlds were already basically Christianized or Christian influence. So both of these writings had to pass through Christian censors. And the only point of this entire diatribe here or monologue is to tell you that if you read them or you hear the stories, they sound a little silly. And
Mhm.
that's because they had to sound silly. They had to sound like kid stories to pass the censors and be allowed at all. So you have to look deeper into them. Now, for those of you who don't want to read Old Norse or Old English or long poems or whatever, I strongly recommend that you get on Audible Neil Gaiman's version of the Norse Edda. If you don't know who Neil Gaiman is, he wrote a lot of famous books, including American Gods, which was a series for like one season on, I think, Showtime or Stars or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's Nevermore. He wrote Anansi. He collaborated with Terry Pratchett. So, but he reads it himself, and he reads it and he rewrites it truly, but in modern language. So it's really excellent, but it still has elements of the silliness. You can't take it out. Okay, so let's go a little bit.
Mhm.
So that's why it's so hard to put things together. So if you listen to the linguists,
So from
yeah,
from the little that I know, right? I do know that again, like you mentioned, they had to make these stories seem a little outlandish or a little a little less than I guess what they maybe originally were, so they can
mhm.
pass as guess like fairy tale and as opposed to the religion that it was at that time. So I wonder how much of it was actually how much of it is how much of it of the original actually persisted. That's something that I know, something that we'll probably never know, but I think it's interesting. And you mentioned before that Thor, I think it was Thor that you said, also had this tie to fertility. And I think it's interesting that apparently Frigg, who we'll discuss later, I'm sure, um, is a male god who was tied to fertility. And that seems to be very kind of original or I haven't heard of a religion that tied fertility to a male god
You
before
have
this. And I
you
thought
just
that
haven't been told that every king
mm,
god is tied to rain and storms, and almost all of them kill a serpent or a dragon. Every hero god is tied to, whether it's Baal, whether it's Yahweh, whether it's Marduk, whether it's Zeus, whether it's Horus. All all of
mhm,
them in some way, shape, or form are tied to something that brings life to their land. So in most of the ones I named, they're talking about, you think about the lightning and the thunder, but what is lightning and thunder? It's the rain. What does the rain do? It grows the crops. You drink water. It feeds you. It feeds. That's why so many of
mhm,
these religions have sacred animals. I mean, so far that into India, which is of course where the Indus Valley is, um, that the cow is so sacred that they don't eat it. They don't eat the
mhm,
cow, at least if you're devout. Um, and so, in Egypt, where they didn't have any problem with needing water, because they're the one of the reasons, maybe the reason Egypt was the first empire, the first nation state, is because they had an abundance of water. Then, I mean, part of their annual routine was that the Nile every year would overflow. They don't have a flood myth. They love the floods. They knew when to
uh-huh,
move inland, and that's why they could grow more food than they needed, which is why they were able to have a standing army, which is what made them a nation state and ultimately an empire. And they could sell, and that's why they were able to sell wheat and extra grains to the Greeks and the Romans to allow them to become empires. So it's all about that. Anyway, I don't want you said Frigg. I think you're confusing. Frigg is female. You're confusing Freyr, who is Freyja's twin brother, and
okay.
holy
Mhm,
holy or sacred twins, pretty much every religion. Isis, Osiris. In Japanese, there's the sacred twins. And if you don't think Adam and Eve aren't sacred twins, I have a bridge sitting in the middle of the rivers between Baltimore and Anne Arundel County that I have to sell you, because they absolutely are. So sacred twins all over the place. Um, Freyja is the one that really confused me, because I'm like, I know Freyja. Who's Freyja? And then I saw the movie The Northman, just what was it, 2 years ago maybe?
Ooh,
And
I heard that was good. I haven't watched it, but I heard good things. I would definitely get to add it to my watch list.
people can judge for themselves whether it was good. I mean, personally, I preferred the original version, Conan the Barbarian. But
Okay.
anyway, but the evil uncle who becomes the evil stepfather had his removed himself to Iceland, and his patron god was Freyr, who was a man. And I'm like, wait a minute, but Freyja is a woman. What's happening here? And so that's when I had to dig a little bit deeper, because I don't. What one of the things the Garden of Doom is for is to scratch those itches, which I get curious about. But unfortunately, like, it's like peeling an avocado or an onion. You keep finding other layers and other things that you don't know about. But luckily, when you dig deep enough, you start to see comparisons. You're like, oh, I know what this is about. Anyway, so let's go a little bit back. So I think it's sort of important to give a brief overview, if possible, of a Norse creation. And this is in really simplistic terms. Listen, I have a show on Garden of Doom. There's stuff all over YouTube. There's books, you name it. But basically, in the beginning, land of fire, land of ice, or maybe the reverse, land of ice, land of fire, in the middle of void. As they get closer and closer together, you start getting rain, and blocks of ice start to melt. And in that block is a giant ice giant, the first giant. And in that, somehow there's a primordial cow that's there that
Okay.
licks the salt licks, and sort of awakens that giant. The giant feeds on the udders, the milk of the cow. The cow, of course, has extra udders, and those feed the cardinal points. And from there, you have Buri, who also comes out of. Buri is Odin's grandfather. Like a lot of the primordial gods, they sort of play very little role, except that they exist and they're the heavens, and they peace out. Buri has a son named Bur. We don't know what Bur does, except that but he procreates with other giants because more things are happening. Giants and gods are basically interchangeable at this point.
Okay.
From somewhere out of that, Odin and his two brothers emerge. From Odin and his two brothers, they don't like the ice giant Ymir, and they kill him. And from killing him, and from his blood, and from all of his parts, become the heaven and the earths and the animals and this, that, and the other thing. And then Odin and his two brothers, they sort of wandering around the earth, which they call Midgard. They're sort of bored. They're like, we're gods, but somebody needs to serve us. And, forgetting about all these other giants and other things that are going out there. And then there's begetting and begatting up there between giants and gods and other creatures, which are called, there's dwarves, there's elves, which are all sort of lesser, especially there's dark elves, which may or may not also be dwarves.
Okay. So think like Middle Earth.
Well, yeah. I mean, Tolkien basically took a lot from the Norse directly. There's no secret about that. And in that, they come upon driftwood, and out of elm and ash, they make their version of Adam and Eve. Except Odin just basically makes human statues out of the wood, and he's like, I'm out of here. And then one of his brothers goes, well, this is boring. And he turns them into sort of flesh and blood where they can move and do stuff. And then the other brother's like, well, this is still pretty useless. And he gives them sentience. And then they walk off and leave the humans to their own in their own little Garden of Eden. So that's sort of the Norse creation story. Somewhere in this time, we also have the Vanir. So Odin and his brothers, definitely part of the Aesir. There's ice giants, there's fire giants, there's these other creatures and beings that are somewhere between, they're immortal and they're not quite gods, but they have certain skills. And then you have the Vanir. So the Aesir, sort of think of them as your hunter-gatherer gods. These are your war. These are your samurai. These are your Greek heroes. These are what you think of Vikings. Winning is everything. Good deaths is everything. It doesn't matter how you win as long as you win. There's no such thing as cheating, except there are some codes that they have amongst themselves. But water and fertility is important to grow things, but it's mostly for the animals. There's not much farming going on. Farming is sort of looked down upon. there are people, there are anthropologists and archaeologists and humanists and sociologists and everything. They will argue, and feminists as well. They will argue that like switching from hunter-gatherer to a settlement society is when we lost the sacred feminine and when men sort of took over and ruined the world. And there are actually pretty good cases to be made for that.
Mhm.
Not sure if it's correlation or causation, but the reason I mention that is because the Vanir are more of your settlement gods. They're your gods of music, of farming, of magic. Though the other gods have magic too. It's just different magic. Um,
Okay. So these are like
Poetry,
the everyday man's kind of gods. Your blue collar gods.
sort of like metal. I mean, it's a lot like the Masonic legend where everything bad came from the line of Cain and they created all of these things. Or the Book of Enoch, that's canon in some, where a fallen angel brought all this technology to humans that they weren't supposed to get. Or the legend of Atlantis, where they spread across and brought poetry and farming and music and metallurgy and weapon making and all these things to people. Or Prometheus, bringing fire to people. I mean, it's all the same story. Osiris traveled around and did, and that's why so many sort of occult and esoterics have Osiris and Thoth as one and the same, being the traveler. Thoth, the Atlantean, traveling and bringing sacred wisdom and knowledge to everyone. So that's always been sort of given a bad rap. But when you hear the words, they're not the bad rap. Like if anyone's ever heard the song Donovan Atlantis, first of all, if you haven't, go listen to it. It's like
All
a
right.
wonderful song. But he tells you that when Atlantis was dying, they sent the doctor, the poet, the musician, the this, the that, the other, across the lands of the world to bring that technology to people. It's the same myth ever. The Viracocha in what's now Peru, Chile. It's all the same thing. That's the Vanir, and this is Freyja. Freyja. I wanted to name this show, and you said we probably couldn't for YouTube. The same as the Red Hot Chili Peppers, at least in my lifetime, their most famous album. Probably, I think California Case became more famous. But anyway, Blood, Sex, Sugar, Magic, because that's Freyja. If you want to turn off now, that's Freyja. She's blood, sex, magic, sugar. She is Aphrodite and Athena in one. She's Ishtar. She's Inanna. She's she's basically the phoenix. She does it all. Now, Freyja means lady, and the word derives from Freuya, which in certain linguistic versions of these same languages, as I drift, is Freug or Freyga. So is she also Frigg or Frigga? A week ago when we spoke, I said I don't think so. Now I'm sure
Mhm.
that she is. Now I've heard a lot that as things has evolved, she hasn't. So in a storyline, possibly not. And there's a lot of current practitioners of paganism and witchcraft, and they're like, I feel I'm connecting with different goddesses. I don't want to diminish their beliefs, but as far as the storyline doesn't continue. I mean, the storyline started 2,500 years ago or whatever. I'm convinced now, same person. And basically, there was a war between the Vanir and the Asgardians, the Aesir. And as strong and tough as the Asgardians are, and as weak and settled as the Vanir were, it was a stalemate. And so at the
Mm.
end, they tried to exchange hostages. In fact, one of the stories is that the war started over some Asgardians, three unnamed gods, trying to kill Freyja. They found her in the woods and they tried to kill her. They burned her 3 times and she resurrected 3 times, sort of like a
Oh, wow.
phoenix.
That's
And
insane.
yep. So, and then they're like, we give
I don't know
up.
if
But
you've
that
heard
out.
that this debate online, though. There's a big debate online going about how women would rather be um, lost in the woods with a bear than a man. And that just made me think of that. Like, okay, yeah, clearly the bear is the better option because if even Freya can't even, get catch a break. But continue.
Well, I mean, she did though, because she kept resurrecting. Whatever they did had no effect on her. Like she kept rising like the phoenix, and but this outraged the Vanir, and that might have been what caused the war, or maybe it frustrated the Asgard because it's all lost. It's all lost to the annals of history. So depending on who's telling the story, but in the peace that was reached, we only know the names of 3 Vanir, and that's Freyja, the twin brother Freyr, and their father. What's his freaking name? Njord. Njord, and he's a sea god. So you think like Poseidon or whatever, or Neptune, pretty big deal, right?
Mhm.
But not here, which is, I mean, Nam is the sea god in both ancient Israelite and ancient Akkadian and Babylonian, and nobody really talks about that Nom either. So, I guess the sea god isn't that big a deal if you're not particularly afraid of the sea. I
Which
don't.
is,
Anyway,
I think it's interesting that I feel like that's a lesser known god, this god of the sea, and considering how I feel as if, and again, this is based off of my knowledge of Vikings via the television show, so it could be way off. They were very like seafaring people, so you would
Mhm.
think that Odin wouldn't be as popular as this king of the oceans or god of the oceans. But yeah, Odin was top dog, right? And then it was, all under him.
Odin is a different question because Odin wasn't always a top dog. Odin was sort of imported, sort of northwards from Germanic and Anglo-Saxon. I, my own theory, which I mean can never be proven or disproven, is that Odin was more of the druidical figure and was important. He was, and he was sort of adopted into as king of the gods. And Odin's big thing is always, I know in the MCU, Odin's supposed to be like the most powerful, but Odin wasn't the most powerful, and I mean, Odin was looking for wisdom. He gave up his eye for wisdom. He hung on a tree for 9 days and went into the realm of death for wisdom. And he talked and he made deals with Freyja for wisdom. She taught Odin magic. Whether or not she taught him all his tricks, we don't know. But
Okay.
this is. I mean, these things are all entangled together. So a couple things that Freyja is associated with that might be interesting to people. She is a chariot that's driven by a golden bristled boar. That might sound silly, but in Viking world, boars were like the apex hunting creature. Like they were the biggest danger. I mean, sure there were bears and wolves too, but your berserkers would wear bear skins, wolf skins, or boar skins, because boars were fierce. They are fierce. Remember,
Mhm.
boars killed Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones, after all. So that's a big deal. It's not like she's with pigs,
Mhm.
boars. And she also traveled through the different realms. Remember, there's 9 realms in the Asgardian world by cats. So she's sort of associated with boars and cats. Um, Her father Njord, her brother Freyja were sent as basically hostages, but peace hostages. It's basically truce, peace. Well, what else comes with those things? Usually marriage. So an alliance signified by marriage. So that's another sort of commonsensical support that Freyja and Odin were married. Now, Freyja is rumored to have had 3 husbands. One
Okay.
is her brother. Jaime and Cersei Lannister,
Okay.
there's nothing other than it's sort of rumored in the stories that was there. Maybe 2,600 years ago, there's some certainty on this, but right now not.
Uh-huh.
Then she had a husband named Oder, Odr. Does it sound
Mm.
anything like Odin?
Thank you.
Here are the traits of Oder. He traveled a lot. He
Uh-huh.
wandered around the lands in disguise, and she was sad when he was gone. That's it. Well, what
Okay.
did Odin do? He's known for wandering around in disguise, seeking knowledge, leaving everybody alone. And Frigg would be sad when he's gone. So there's some of that. And then the third husband is Odin. So all those things, including language drift and pronunciation drift, go into me being convinced that she is that. Now, the reason I call her the sacred feminine is because I think she embodies everything that is feminine power, which is just power, except in a woman. But she's also sex. Basically, she's the goddess of everything from cradle to grave: fertility, birth, and death. There's some belief that she is queen of the Valkyries. I personally don't believe that she's queen of the Valkyries, but she has a Valkyrie-like um, feature.
As we
So
see in our
when
image here.
that's right, when warriors are killed, the everyone knows Valhalla. That's Asgard's hall of the warriors that are they fight all day and they drink all night and then they do it again the next day until Ragnarok. Well, the Vanir had their own hall as well, and it's called Folkvagar. And it serves more or less the same function, except the dead are a little bit more civil there, but there's still warriors. The Valkyrie take the dead in droves to Valhalla. Freyja gets to take her pick, and she brings them to Folkvagar. So they serve a similar function, but they're going to two different houses. So I think it's
Okay.
just assumed she's their queen because she's a goddess, and they're sort of something lesser goddesses, or more like, maybe they'd be like the equivalent of female archangels, if you would, or jinn, sort of lesser immortal beings. But I don't think she's the queen of the Valkyrie because she has no interplay with them other than she gets first pick. But why wouldn't the queen of the gods get first pick? Other than
Okay.
that, but she's definitely a warrior. Specific story. So another reason why I think that she is Odin's wife is because there's a story where while Thor is gone, the Asgardians are worried that they're vulnerable, and so it's suggested that they build a wall around Asgard. But they're like, oh my goodness, that's going to take so long. We're gods, but we're basically helpless. And then some wandering stranger with this gigantic horse comes and says, I'll build the wall for you, but on one condition or two conditions. But the condition that matters here, and they're like, what's the condition? I get to marry Freyja. And the gods
Oh.
are all outraged. So why would they
Mm-hmm.
be outraged if it's just a hostage they took? They'd be outraged if it's their king's queen, right? Or their queen at this point. But they riddle this and they say, okay, no matter how big and strong you are and how fast and excellent that horse is, you'll never do it. So, or you'll never do it in a year. So you must finish in a year. And if you don't finish in a year, then no deal, no dice. And this guy says, no problem, I'll take care of it. So he's building fast. He's got this giant horse, fast, and the gods are getting really nervous. So I think it's Loki that got them into this mess with the counter deal. Loki's always getting them into messes, and they usually forgive him until they don't, in a very epic way, which of course leads to Ragnarok as well. And so Loki turns himself into a mare in heat, and the giant
Okay.
horse follows the mare. And we don't see Loki for a while, but when Loki comes back, he has an 8-legged baby horse with him. So Loki is basically the mother of this baby horse, and the 8-legged horse becomes Odin's steed. But basically, Loki seduced the male giant horse, and then the stranger reveals himself to be a frost giant, an ice giant. It's like, you gods have no honor. And they're like, yeah, well, too bad. You didn't do it in the year. Get the hell out of here. And they managed to finish the wall themselves. But this was over a demand for Freyja. There's another story where somehow Thor's hammer goes missing, and Loki goes to Freyja and asks for her falcon feathers so that she can fly, so that he can find it. So he flies. She does, and he flies around the world, and he finds the hammer. Thor retrieves it. And there's another one where she might be a witch with a G name, Gulvani or something, and she tells Odin about the prophecies, and she teaches magic. So there you go. Magic, sex positive, fertility, war, the dead, the full cycle. She also has a necklace of power, which is coveted. Loki always seems to want it. It's sort of like Thanos' gauntlet.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Jewelry.
so
We love to see it.
yeah, and so that's Freyja. I mean, she's everyone. I'd say that she's, like I said, I think the easiest analogy is if you take the properties of Aphrodite and Athena and put them into one. That's Freyja, including having, well, or maybe like an Isis and Athena are very similar. And Isis had Osiris as a twin brother, so who was sort of the god of knowledge and the benefactor of humanity, much like Freyr wasn't necessarily the benefactor of humanity, but sort of he was the male god associated with fertility and agriculture, among other things. But he also had a pretty righteous. He had a sword that could fight by itself, and he wasn't anyone to fool with, also. But the show's not about Freyr, so that's Freyja. And then we went a little bit over the 30 minutes that we were hoping for, but
No, I think it's very interesting. Her power set, and I noticed this as a trend. Whenever it seems to be like a male deity, it's like there's magic, but their magic is more associated with this is their power, versus when it's a woman deity, it's like, okay, they're a magical being, like they're, they're the keepers of magic. And in a way, it almost feels like that magic is kind of like a feminine kind of thing. It always seems to be pushed on women as they're magical versus they're powerful, right? In from there's this other show. It's a spinoff of Vikings, I believe. It's also called Vikings, but I think it's called Vikings Valhalla.
Mhm.
And there is a female character, and she and her brother get over from Greenland, and they come with their traditional beliefs of, they believe in Freyja, they believe in all of that, but it
Is
was
this
during the time where,
is it Leif Erikson or Eric the Red? Because they're the
yes,
ones who actually did that.
yes, yes. So the sister, she's going through this kind of awakening, and I thought it was interesting because the magic that is most associated with Freyja is like transformational magic.
Yep.
And there's this transformation going on within this character, not physically, of course, but like this awakening in her, and that's attributed to Freyja. So it's I don't it seems like it's a lot of, there's a lot to her story. There's a lot to the magic that's associated with her. There's um a lot to her story, and I'm glad we were able to highlight her a little bit today.
I am too. I don't want to. I don't want to impeach the host or the hostess, but in Norse, it really isn't like everything. I mean, Loki also is a shapeshifter. Loki definitely dabbles in magic, and he's
Mhm.
giant. The dwarves make magic things all the time. And I don't think there's rarely references to female dwarves. Period. The elves and dark elves definitely travel through realm. I mean, I in a lot of
But
religions.
elves are like, I don't know. I feel like whenever, especially in modern times, it's definitely less. It's called magic, but when people refer to it, it's almost like, oh, they're so powerful. They have this power, and even
Well,
elves, they
bingo.
kind of have like this feminine energy to them, right?
I think that's
But
our modern. I think that's our modern spin, and maybe that's sort of the feminist argument that men taking over the world has sort of made magic and given witchcraft a bad name. And again, there's a case to be made for that. But like the first time I interviewed someone on Egyptian magic, and it was a British magic practitioner named Mog Morgan. He's been on the show Garden Doom a couple times, and I said, "Well, talk about Egypt mythology," and he's like, and magic. He's like, well, you can't really separate the two. And I had no idea what he's talking about, but I do now. It's the same with Chinese. It's the same with Japanese. It's the same with, there really is no distinction between the mythos and magic. The gods' powers and they're the same thing. It's so
Mhm,
it really is a modern construct to separate them. And I think that's a very, I don't want to blame, I don't know how else to say it than that it's a very Christianized thing to do,
mhm,
to change it. That there really wasn't that difference where sort of magic became associated with the demons, which came from the fallen angels, so Genesis, the Nephilim, and everything bad flowed from there. I mean, that's at the root of a lot of Christian faiths or sort of fringe beliefs, that where it's not mythology, it's not a lesson, it's not a parable, it's fact.
mhm,
The bloodlines, the reptilians, all of that is from that. And so magic, yeah, gets a bad rap and gets feminized. But prior to that, there really was no distinction. If you said gods, you wouldn't have to say magic. They weren't two different things. It was the same in most. I mean, the druids who are magical, the shamans who are magical. I mean, they were your priests. They were your key to the spiritual realm, above and below. So as above, so below, your ancestors, and so I think that's a modern construct. Back then, it wasn't. Now, she had more powerful magic than Odin. She taught Odin, but Odin, how we think of Odin is like Anthony Hopkins and you're in the comic book. Odin wasn't that powerful a god. Thor was the protector. Thor's the one who killed the Midgard serpent. I mean, Odin only killed Fenrir by being swallowed by Fenrir after throwing his spear with his magic horse word. Loki was the mother of. Um, mythology is weird, man. It's all so deep. It's so cool. It's so interesting. But yeah, I mean, so I see what you're saying, but it's actually less complicated than that in some ways, but in other ways it's more complicated. And with that, I hope that I completely confuse the audience so that they dig into this more themselves.
All right. Well, if you like the video, please like the video. Let us know what other gods or whatever you would like us to discuss next. Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channels. And we will see you soon for another, Gardens of the Superior.
Once a
See ya.
month, last Saturday of every month is the plan at around this time.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.